women think of aging like it's this disease they don't want to contract. There are shots that can keep you from getting the disease. There are pills that can keep you from getting the disease. Aging is the equivalent not of increasing in value, but of moving into obsolescence.
Welcome to The Deep Dish, a podcast where we like to have deep conversations about deep truths. I am Courtney Doctor, and I am here with my dear friend Melissa Kruger. And today's episode is probably the episode that I'm not sure you want to be invited onto. It is on aging. And so as I introduce my guest, I'm not sure how you feel about the fact that you are the guest on this episode.
You're here with your dear friend Melissa and your hag friend, Jen. Yes.
No, because I will
Full
just,
hag
I
status
will
over
admit
here.
I'm the oldest at the table, but we are joined by our dear friend, Jen Wilkin. So we are glad to be talking about this. Do we want to say how old we are?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, I'm 56, but I'm almost 57. So probably I will be 57 when this is.
Okay.
And I am 50. I'm the baby.
Oh, she is just a generation gap.
Look like this baby skin.
So baby-like,
I'm
yes.
just a baby.
Adorable. I'm 55, veering toward 56 rapidly.
And
yes.
amazing, you are both grandmothers. I mean,
yeah.
I
y'all
know.
do not look like my picture in
Thank
my
you.
mind of like my grandmother.
Have you seen all of the discussions around like the Golden Girls TV show
Yes.
and how old
Yes.
they
Are we
actually
the Golden
were?
Girls?
I'm as
Were
old as
they?
one of them.
No.
Yeah.
No.
We should have called the
I
podcast
saw
The Golden Girls.
The Golden Girl. This episode could
Deep
at
Dish,
least
the
yeah.
Golden Girl episode.
all
Yeah.
look like Betty White every day of the week.
Seriously.
I
But
mean,
it is
she
really
looks-
interesting how like the cultural idea of what it
Yeah.
means to be a certain age has changed.
I know.
Dramatically.
I know.
Yeah.
How old do you feel inside?
24.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah.
That's a lot younger than I
Yeah.
thought you were
24.
going to say.
I know.
No, I've just been
I-
stuck in 24 in my head.
That's fascinating. I
What
feel
about
like
you?
late 30s, 38.
I was going to say 32.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Jen.
out of my
24.
20s.
Jen's 24.
Jen's
She is
still going out on
sticking
Friday
with
nights. Like,
She is sticking with
No, like a
24.
smarter, sort of slower 24.
Really mature
That's-
24.
I
That's
was not,
38.
not at all. Nope. Nope.
But I think there is something to the fact that at every age, it's shocking. I was talking to one of my daughter-in-laws this past week about that she's like, I can't believe that I am, whatever age she was. And I was like, I know. I think you
Yeah.
feel that at absolutely every age.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So as we've gone through this process, what are some of your favorite things about getting to this early to mid 50s?
Well, I think it's like that. You know how they'll say, I don't think I'm smart, but I'm not as dumb as I used to be. Like I know I don't know everything, but I know more than I used to know. And also some of it is like you can assess like just exactly what you don't know a lot better than you could when you were younger. And I think just, the clarity that comes with, like I'm not going to be a neurosurgeon. I'm not going to be a famous baker. Like the number of potentialities in front
That's
of
right.
me
That's
is
true.
getting smaller and smaller. And there's such a ground. I think I thought when I was younger and felt like a lot of potentialities, it's like, well, it'll be all over by the time I'm 55.
Right.
I mean, what is there to look forward to except death? And I feel just so much clarity and purposefulness around the things that are the path in front of me. And that feels really good.
It does, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, it is a little bit more of a stable season when I think about the 20s.
Yeah.
Everything was changing constantly.
Yes.
Where you live, if
was
you
all
have
question
roommates.
marks.
Yeah, there's so many question marks. And so
How's it all going to pan out?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. So it's settled somewhat. It doesn't mean it's easier. Doesn't mean there aren't hard things, but there's kind of a
Yeah.
settledness of, okay, this is generally what I'm doing with my life.
Mhm.
Versus in your 20s, I think there's just pressure to figure out
Mhm.
what am I going to do with my life? Like I'm watching, I don't know, you're right. Our kids are all kind of in that age.
Yeah.
And watching them, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that again.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I
There
don't
is a
look back
joy in
at like,
that.
even though I feel like 24 in my head, I'm not like, man, I wish I could be 24 again.
No.
Yeah.
Although I loved it. I haven't had a season of life that I haven't
I know.
enjoyed.
Yeah.
But did you guys have the sense that once you got to a certain age, it was just sort of like this drop off of into
Oh, for sure.
who even cares what happens after
Who
that age?
even
Because it can't be
cares?
anywhere near as exciting as those earlier stages of life.
Yeah. And so far, I've not found that to be true at
No.
all.
No.
I think at every stage I've said I actually wouldn't go back.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There's a joy in that. And and I've said this in relationship to my marriage, that we've worked so hard. It's become so valuable. I remember the first time I heard the Shania Twain song, Looks Like We Made It. And I was like, I think we did. You know, there's like that hard-earned thing that whatever it is, it just becomes more valuable. And that doesn't have to be marriage. It can be you have persevered through all the struggles of singleness and come to a place of it, whatever it is that you're wrestling through, and you come to that place of not just acceptance of the things, but value of the things,
Yeah.
where you see how the Lord has used it. When did you, and I'm asking this question because I have such a vivid memory of it. I had gone over, I was probably in my early 40s, gone over to younger friends of my house. And as I left, she said to me, "Thank you so much for coming over. I've been wanting to meet with an older woman."
Yeah.
And I thought, is she wanting me to introduce her to one? Like I really didn't know. I had to kind of get in my car and like look in my mirror, like, I think she meant me. But when did it first hit you? Or did you have any of those moments where you're like, oh my word, I am now the older woman?
Well, for me, it's more the absence of some things. It used to be when I would go speak at places, they would be like, "Oh, you're the speaker? Do you have children?"
Yeah.
Which was, "You're really young." And I don't hear those questions anymore. No one looks surprised when I get out, you know, and it even at the grocery store, because I've always had a young looking face. You know, I mean, well, can I say this? If you're buying alcohol, no one's carding me anymore.
Right.
I mean, like there are things that I
Yeah.
feel like I kept for a while that no one's asking those questions anymore. And they say ma'am a lot. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Like, who are you talking to? I don't know.
Well, I started talking a lot about church mothers and how we needed
no.
church
Yes.
mothers in the church, because I'm like, doesn't everybody want
Yeah.
that? Thinking,
I want
I
that.
want a church mother. And then people at my church started calling me Mama Jen, and I was like, oh.
Oh, wow.
Oh, but
Mhm.
really in my case, we had moved in 2007. We moved from Houston to Dallas, and I went from a church that had an older population to a church that was much younger. And I was 38, and I remember how it was like moving 4 hours north made me go from too young to have any credibility to so old that I was supposed to be a source and fountainhead of wisdom. Just because of the context of where we were doing ministry. And so I definitely felt my age more, you know, at the church with the younger people, because you do realize, oh, they are looking at me and they think I am decrepit because they're all 21 and 22.
Yeah.
So I do think a lot of it has to do with like who you're in proximity to.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm like, no, I just got married.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Yeah.
no, you didn't.
No, you did not.
That was
Yeah.
now 27 years.
Yeah.
That's older than I am.
Yeah.
We're starting to see it at the seminary now. My husband's at a seminary, and for the first time, the students are my kids' ages.
Yeah.
And that kind of freaked me out.
Yeah. When we went to seminary in our 40s, my husband looked at me and he was like, some of the professors are younger than us. And it's just that. And the kids in the class, the kids listen to that. The young adults in the class would call me, you know, Mom, are you going to make a study guide for us? And it was kind of all, and it was at a move. It was sort of that change of, oh, wow, I am really stepping in as an older woman. And so it was hard at first. And so what do you think, how does our current cultural moment, how does our particular culture really impact our ability? And I don't mean just the three of us, I just mean all women. How does it impact how we age and how either easy or difficult it is?
I mean, life has a symmetrical sweep to it, and we have a culture that only values one half of it, maybe not even all of the one half. And I would say that really the way that I find that women think of aging is like it's this disease they don't want to contract. And so there are shots that can keep you from getting the disease. There are pills that can keep you from getting the disease. And there are surgeries that can keep you that can preserve you from the disease. And it's such an odd way to think about the aging process. But I think it's a response to a very true idea that is embedded in our culture, that aging is the equivalent not of increasing in value, but of moving into obsolescence. And so and nobody wants to be obsolete. And we understand obsolescence in a way that even previous generations didn't, because we probably have our first iPhone in a drawer somewhere, or, I found my Walkman from when I was in high school. Yeah. And my husband has a jam box up in the attic that his mom engraved his name on, because just in case anyone was going to steal it. So just amazing. If you guys want to play a cassette, let me know. And I think about there's that jam box, and then 2 floors down is this vase that I received when my mom passed away. It's not worth thousands of dollars, but it's worth maybe $150, $200. And if I keep it another 30 or 40 years, it will increase in value. And we don't think of the elderly like that. Yeah. We think of the elderly like the jam box, that they're obsolete. But that's a new cultural development, speaking worldwide and historically. That's a new way of thinking about the aging process.
My husband does ministry in Kenya, and they have called him aged, and it's a compliment. And so I have also started calling him aged because it's fun. And fun. But you're right, it is not something that our culture values. Yeah. And so how do we, no matter where we are on this, this aging journey, this aging spectrum, how do we end up shaping our own thoughts, not about our aging, but about the aging of others? How do we push against that in our own hearts?
Well, and even just to answer your other question, I was thinking the other day how much I am being shaped by Instagram. I normally think of it as, the poor young girls who are being shaped by Instagram.
Right.
How difficult must it be to be 18 or 20? Or I can even remember on Facebook when all the young moms were posting their babies at 3 months and 6 months in the onesies. And I was like, I'm so glad I didn't have that. That would be real pain to get organized. But yet I'm realizing, it really is impacting me. Yeah. I'm looking to see what should a 50-year-old look like.
Yes.
And to be honest, we live in public spaces.
Yes.
So it can be intimidating. Will I lose value?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, will people still listen? Because they're listening to the 29-year-old Instagrammer.
Right.
And will they still value
the aged?
Yes. And it's often related to beauty, to be quite honest.
Right.
Because even those 29 influencers are often highly attractive. And so there's this, I think we have more images put forth.
For sure.
And it's impacting all of us. Whereas I don't really remember my mom talking or thinking about this a lot. I think there was maybe just more of a settled acceptance. I don't know if that's true. How do you,
Definitely my grandmother, I would say. There was just that settled acceptance and almost, and I almost look at that now with a little bit of envy, that I wish that was, because I know for me, it's a constant act of asking the Lord to give me self-forgetfulness and humility, just even in my own aging body, that I wouldn't get unduly preoccupied with it.
Well, I think historically self-forgetfulness has been one of the gifts of the aging process. And now we're in a cycle where even in your 20s, you're supposed to be thinking about wrinkles before you even have them.
Yes.
So even in the only decade where they weren't even supposed to be on your mind, you're being told that they should be. Yeah. And so you get into this cycle where I've sometimes thought of it, it's like elective body dysmorphia, where we've chosen to have a dysmorphia where, like I just said, I felt like I'm 24. You guys said an age that's younger than you are. And then there's a whole industry that rushes toward that and goes, well, if you feel that way on the inside, why wouldn't you look? Why don't you want your outside to look like the way your inside feels? Well, it's because the way I feel on the inside is not true. It's not, and what the Bible tells us is you got to pay attention to the truth of your age, no matter how you feel. And I'll feel it like people will often say to me, because I'm not covering my gray. I have not really I've got it like right here at my temples. And this is we're not about to yell at you about whether you're dyeing your hair or not. But
I am, just to be,
wait for the point. You are dyeing your hair.
Yes,
Yeah. And so I'm not like saying dyeing your hair is bad. I have not really had to because my gray has come in so slowly. And so people would say to me, oh, you look so young for your age. And I have to really ask myself, what is that feeling I just had when they said that to me? Was I glad they said that? Because we really think that is the highest compliment you can pay to a woman in our age demographic is that you don't look your age.
Rather than, I'm so blessed to have had that conversation with you because of the wisdom you gave to me. Like that, so even what we think would be a compliment.
Well, and like younger women, again, it goes back to obsolescence, right? Like if you're viewed as growing obsolete because like maybe you don't even know how to download the app onto your phone and you need someone to help you, then why would I come to you for advice on how to raise my children or how to fix my marriage? And there's not a sense of the wisdom that is accumulated. So there's the wisdom that comes from God that he just drops on us if we ask him. But then there's also this wisdom of aging that is from seeing the same things repeat again and again and from learning our own hard lessons through our own repeated mistakes or our repeated successes at things. And that is something that I think younger generations are not, they don't want to look to an older generation for that because, again, if we can't even handle the tech, how can we handle...
What do we actually know?
What do we actually know? I mean, the world has changed so much. How do we... And this is to say nothing of even like the divides in the way that we view politics or the way that we view religion because of how we've been so bifurcated through social media and all kinds of forces.
So as women, older women, I mean, I used to say, oh, I'm not in midlife. And Mike was like, how long are you planning to live? If you're 50, if you're not at midlife yet, how long is this going to go on? But what responsibility do you feel in how you age as part of discipling the next generation? Like, how is this a discipleship issue? We kind of want to just say a little bit about like, well, what I do doesn't impact anyone else. Like, how does it impact other people? The choices we make,
do, right?
Yeah,
there's no such thing as a decision that only impacts you.
No such thing. The decisions for good, the decisions for bad, and honestly, I think there's never been it's never been more needed than now to say, let me at least show you an option of aging without all of taking advantage of all of the opportunities that we have to look as if we're not aging. And so sometimes it's just showing that way of saying, it's okay. Let your gray grow out. I mean, I'm not, so that's convicting, right? But no, but it's whether it's just the clothes we choose or what we decide to do with hair and face or body. I mean, those things and how much time we're spending on them. I mean, those are all discipleship issues.
Yeah. I remember one of the things my mom said to me. She has had breast cancer. She's had a double mastectomy. I remember we were standing in the dressing room and we're getting changed, and there are just changes when you you don't have to wear certain undergarments and things when you have had a double mastectomy. But she just looked at me and she said, I'm going to get teared up. She just looked at me and said, I'm just so glad to be alive.
Yes.
And so, and I think about, I had a dear friend, Debbie, who died of breast cancer. And she said, I just wish I could see my kids graduate. She didn't get to. And, when you think about aging is a gift.
It's a gift.
And we too often think of it as a disease. And I could see it in my mom. Rather than be ashamed of the scars of aging, she embraced the life she'd been given. And I think that it it really is a discipleship issue. In that moment, I now hear a different voice in my head when I start aging. I'm just so
Mhm.
glad to be here.
Yes. Well, and we're living longer than people used to.
Right.
You know, even at the turn of the 20th century,
Yeah.
the average life expectancy was something like 49 years old.
I know.
And so I think that like death was a more present reality for previous generations, and it happened in front of you. It didn't happen in a hospital.
Mhm.
And I think that's another thing that we are missing, is the overlap of these different age groups. Like it's not just that the aging or the elderly are obsolete. It's that they should be out of sight. They should be out of view. And so, you know, I'm living now I've got my in-laws who live a block and a half away. I spend a week with my parents who are an hour and a half away. I'm having a lot of overlap with them in their latter years. And it is so instructive and helpful to me in much the same way that I would say that, like Jeff and I have been formed
Mhm.
by being around younger people a lot because of the church that we were in. And now we live in a college town. And so we are around younger people a lot, and it impacts the way you think about a lot of things. And I think what we've forgotten is there's a two-way benefit. There's a benefit to the young by being around those who are older. There's a benefit to the old by being around those who are younger.
Mhm.
I saw all summer long the way that my in-laws who are 80 interacted with their great-grandchildren who were
Yes.
living with us for the summer.
Yes.
And that is shaping across all of those, you know, the four generations that are represented in that moment. And but instead what we think is when you're elderly, you are an obligation who requires care by someone else.
Yeah.
And I learned so much, you know, in the death of my mom, by being the one who gave that care and thinking about, you know, when I was an infant,
Yes.
I didn't apologize for needing
Yeah.
that kind of care. And I certainly don't want her to apologize for needing it now. But those are the kinds of lessons that we only learn when we choose that proximity. And many of us, not only are we not choosing it, it's almost like it's an apparition we don't want in front of us.
Well, and I've heard you say before, Jen, and it was so helpful, that idea that, you know, we have embraced culturally the idea that we don't want to be a burden. And there's a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of it can be self-righteous, it can be prideful, it can be so many things that are not helpful. And so even the idea of being willing to be a burden is an understanding not only of our own limitedness and the fact that we're finite, but also that God is at work as he's teaching others to. I mean, I've cared for my mother-in-law. You've cared for aging parents, but speak to that, because I think I think that is, for anybody listening who is obviously, you know, aging and pushing into the older years, I think that that's a good word to remind women that there's actually benefit and blessing in being a burden.
Absolutely. Well, and this has to do with the theology of a body, which is a bigger question that we should probably talk about. And I'm forgetting who wrote this book, but I'm going to say the book title, and then we can maybe link to it in the show notes. But it was called On Getting Out of Bed. And what he talks about, he's actually talking about depression and how hard it is to get out of bed. And he gets into talk about like the reason that we get out of bed is not for us, it's for everyone else too. And he gets into this whole discussion about the giving of care and the receiving of care, and how anytime we're in a stage of life where we are the giver of care, we know that we are giving it humbly, anticipating the day when we will be the recipient. And it was just such a beautiful, salient thought that when you're young, you perceive that you will never be the one who needs care, and you don't remember, or you've forgotten the years in which you've already received it.
Right.
But when we remember receiving it, then we're better able to anticipate and appreciate the seasons in which we give it, and then in the season in which, if you live a long life, you will be returned essentially to a state of infanthood. And from whom will you receive that care? And we've joked, I do want to be a burden to my children. Not in the sense that, you know, like I want to be a horrible health care giving nightmare to them. But what if we're actually robbing younger generations of something by deciding that we're going to place ourselves out of view in those moments, and then just to have been the recipient of the gift of having gotten to be a part of that caregiving. I think I want this for all of my kids. It's a precious and holy trust. But I do think what we get back to is, an elderly body is not useful. It's not able to contribute in the way that a healthy, youthful body can. And that's the thing we have to come face to face with, right? Is we think it's about losing our looks until we have the health crisis.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it reframes everything. And you realize, I don't care if I'm the most hideous wreck in town if I have a body that works. And I remember, years ago when I started teaching on the resurrection, what's the promise of having a resurrected body? And in the estrogen pond that is women's ministry, so often women's conception of receiving their new body was, I'm finally going to have a flawless complexion.
Yes.
I'm finally going to have thinner thighs, which is the luxury, and I use that, ironically, the luxury opinion of someone who has not suffered a true crisis of health. Because our bodies are given to us because the embodied Christ is seated at the right hand of God the Father. And until such time as he returns, we are the hands and feet of him.
And those new bodies, Jesus's resurrected body actually had scars.
Scars, absolutely.
So we're not promised what they'll be like, but we know they'll be perfected. But so there'll be a right understanding of what they are. So
Of
it's
what
actually
a perfect body looks like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what it's for.
And what it's for.
Yes.
And what it's for. And that's not to say, God bless those among us who are highly decorative in their appearance. Like, way to go. I
Way
do
to go,
think,
God.
I seriously think that the aging process is easier for people who have never had a season of being remarkably attractive. I mean it.
Yeah.
There's just less to let go of, and it's no secret that in a culture that fetishizes youth, we also fetishize attractiveness, and those two go hand in hand. People understand intuitively that to be attractive is to command a form of power.
Yes.
Which means that the aging process is at bare minimum the relinquishing of a form of power. But I would argue, and I know you guys would say, it's also the taking up of another more lasting and significant form of power, for lack of a better word.
Well, Psalm 90:12 teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, that you're
Great gain.
gaining something, and it's something that is so valuable, and something that we will actually have in eternity, which these others we won't. And so, for those listening that are in their youth, they're in their prime, and so define that however you want, right?
Not
But
us.
It's not us. But for those, what words would you say to them? What can a woman do in her 20s and 30s and even 40s to gain this heart of wisdom? What can she do now that will help her age in a way that is cherishing the more valuable thing?
Is this the time I should insert the skincare line? We want them to, we're sponsored.
Yeah, so great.
If you just use this cream, exactly.
You will have the Jesus shine.
Is there some Daniel diet equivalent for face creams?
I think we could make some serious money. But, I do think about what First Peter says. It's an imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And I actually think of that as a spirit that's constrained by the Holy Spirit to walk in the ways of the Lord. So in some ways, that type of, I think of Mary when she's sitting at Jesus's feet learning from him. And, there's just this, I want to learn from you and do whatever you ask me to do. And then I think of this other image of Mary when she is at Jesus's feet, breaking this expensive jar of perfume. And she's, I mean, that's an uncomfortable thing to do.
Yeah.
She's doing this in a room full of men.
Mhm.
And yet this is the story that will be told wherever the gospel's preached. We don't know what she looked like. We don't know anything really. We just know she sat at his feet and then she worshiped at his feet.
Mhm.
And to me, that's this picture of beauty.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and then you think about Christ, there was nothing in his appearance
I
that
know.
would draw us to him. And I think I've often thought, like, why? Like,
Uh-huh.
it didn't have to be that way. Why? And then I will say, we've talked about, like, when did you realize you were invisible? Like that, when did it happen for you where you thought, oh, no one is looking at me and wondering what are my beauty tips, And I've thought about how when that turn happens, you have a choice.
Mhm.
You can either rail against it or you can recognize the newfound power. And I don't mean to make it all sound like it's power, but the newfound power that it grants you. Because I remember thinking, oh, they're really going to listen to my words now because they're not going to look at my face and think, I wonder how she got, her eyes to look that way, or how, no one is thinking, wow, I really wish I looked like her, which means that my looks will in no way be a distraction to the most important thing. And it also, as you mentioned in passing earlier, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because they may decide that you're irrelevant. Yeah. But I believe that there are ways to model substance that are so compellingly beautiful, and that's our hope, is that on that other side of the hump, where from a physical standpoint you have slid into invisibility, that the luminosity of what's happening inside of you begins to be evident. And there's a saying, bodies decline, people develop. Yeah, your body's going to decline. If you've ever read in the paper, how they'll have this couple's been married for 70, they had their 70-year anniversary. Neither one of them is smoking hot. And it's the most
they're
beautiful.
unrecognizable
Yes.
when they put the wedding picture
put-
next to them.
yes.
You're like, how did that happen?
Yes, but
I love
no
that
one would
word.
say they're
I
not
know.
beautiful.
I love the word, though, luminosity.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be our skincare line.
I think there probably is one already. I bet if we Googled it.
But that's the goal.
Yes.
Not like,
Yeah.
because they do. There's this sweet glow, of those older couples. I mean, it's different. It's a different beauty.
But have you known someone? I think about my grandmother who lived to 91.
Yeah.
And she was so beautiful in her, because she got softer. She got, it was like all of the best things about her. Well, they grew, they developed.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing is like, we're all developing towards something.
That's it. We are all developing towards something. And so not everybody becomes luminous.
No.
Not everybody
That's a good point.
becomes.
Because
They're
we've also
not
known the
all
other
glowing.
version of 90,
Yes,
I would
so
imagine.
age in and of
You're right.
itself does not turn into
Automatically.
this thing that we're talking about. I do think it's fascinating in 1 Peter that he uses the phrase imperishable beauty, because we're literally talking about perishable beauty. And so what is this thing that he's talking about that is beautiful and imperishable? And I don't think it's a given. I don't think you necessarily get wise as you get older.
No.
I don't think you necessarily become luminous and radiant. And so what are we doing? What is a woman in her 20s doing? What is she doing in her 30s, her 40s, her 50s, her 60s? So that when she is, Lord willing, 91, she has the radiance of Christ that really only comes through a life lived with him. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Moses' face didn't shine until he was in the presence of God.
That's right.
And so how do we cultivate that? I think it has to be that spending time, but also pushing against intentionally the strong currents of the culture to hold on at all costs. And I do think you asked earlier, Melissa, about discipleship and aging, and I think that is one of the responsibilities for all of us, anybody listening, is to age in a way that shows how to pursue the better thing. And our resources of time, money, energy, all these are limited. And so what are we spending them on? Are we spending them on the pursuit of the perishable beauty? Because come what may, no matter how hard we rail against it, the beauty will perish.
Mhm.
It will fade.
Yeah.
And so are we spending our very limited resources on the thing that
And
will...
you're really right about the stewardship. Because when I think about idolatry,
Mhm.
you look at your time,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
look, at your thought life.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at
Mhm.
what your treasure is being spent on.
Yeah.
And what's hard, I mean, I think we all have to, it's just a good place to repent. I have to repent.
Mhm.
I mean, because I can realize I've spent a lot of time thinking about this
Mhm.
and wondering which cream should I use or which whatever should I use.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, or which jeans will help
Yeah.
you hold everything in.
They got that band. We all know. We all know
pair
about
of
it.
jeans. They
Yeah.
literally not your daughters, right? There's that whole thing that's like, this is going to fit the more mature
Yeah,
body.
exactly.
I'm like, bring it on.
And I mean, and it's just so tempting to say, okay, well, it's okay to spend more money on this or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really easy to spend our life on it. And what's happening around us can kind of push us in that direction too.
Mhm.
So I think it's
Sure.
a cultural pressure we're swimming in, and that makes it harder
Mhm.
in some ways to
Mhm.
fight against it.
I think, any number of spiritual disciplines could be applied to help us to combat the cultural messages about what matters most. But I think you said, what would you tell to a woman in her 20s? I really think there's not much more potent for leading a self-forgetful life than a life of service.
Mhm.
And what I mean is and that's where we come back to a theology of the body, is that everything around us is telling us the primary use of the female body is decorative. But the scriptures are saying, nope, the primary use of the female body is to be useful, to be an embodiment of something. And so, sure, get a pedicure, but picture those feet going to help
Yes.
who?
Yes.
Yes, get a manicure, but picture those hands in
Yeah.
service to someone else. And so it doesn't mean that you can tell, the three of us have not said, I'm not going to wear makeup, I'm not
Right.
going to dye my hair. But that's what I find so often in these conversations is people want to go, well, what can I do?
Mhm.
And then what, where's the line?
Yeah.
Where's the line? And I'm like, where's the line mentality around this is really to miss the whole point. Instead, what's your motive? And what characterizes you?
Mhm.
What characterizes you, and how is the majority of your time being spent? Because I pray for my girls all the time. I mean, for my sons as well, but I pray for my daughters that they will be so busy about the work of the Lord that they will forget to look in the mirror. Pray it for myself.
So good.
And the thing is we will look in the mirror. You have to look in the mirror to brush your teeth and make sure you got all the
Well, I had to go, I was like,
quinoa
oh, do I have
out,
enough lipstick on? I'm going to go. I mean, we look in the mirror.
But
Yeah.
there again, our culture is telling us that you should look in the mirror and not see visible change. And, we know that to look at a phone is having a formational effect on us. But I think we also need to recognize that to actually look in the mirror also has a formational effect on us. And do you want to be formed toward being a person who numbers your days aright, to borrow from the NIV 1984, which is the one I memorized it in? Or do you want to be formed toward sort of a thoughtlessness around the passage of time?
Yeah.
And those are hard questions that we don't ask just once. We ask them over and over and over again. At a bare minimum, aging requires great courage. Great courage. Maybe more courage than anything else that some people will have had to face. Those who have not had a ton of adversity, that will be the thing for them. But if you've ever known someone who grew through adversity, then you can know that even as you age, there is growth there. Because again, even as your body declines, your personhood is gonna develop. That is a rich assurance.
It is a rich
And then to
assurance.
know that on the other side of that, we receive bodies that never decline.
I know.
What can someone take from us?
Well, and in all things, right? We're learning to take our hope out of making this life everything that it can possibly be, and recognizing that it will never be ever. We have our hope of one day all of those things, right?
Mhm.
But in this life, like it's a constant letting go
Mhm.
of, what were you going to say, Melissa?
Well, that just made me think of another thing, because when you think, oh, actually do have an eternity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
numbering our days is living in light of eternity
Yes.
too. So these are the days that we can actually share the gospel with people.
Mhm.
We can actually, that's why how beautiful on
These
the
are the days in
mountains.
which we can store up treasure in heaven.
Yes. And there'll come a day where that's past.
Yep.
So if these days have limited option, I mean, that we're going to have all those things. We're going to have those bodies that can do all the things we want to do and hike all the mountains and, do all the things. But right now, we've been given these bodies. And this is great hope to me, because even when my body doesn't work, in the ways I would like to, even when I'm in that, I hope when I'm in that hospital bed or wherever, the Lord may call us, because isn't aging in some
Yes.
sense a
A
call? He might call
Right.
me. I hope I'm praying for the person in the rest home room next to me. And I hope
Yes.
I'm praying for great grandchildren. We don't believe we become useless.
Yeah.
No. And Trillia Newbell said this to me one time, and it has stuck with me for years. She said, I think that the point of that extreme age of reaching that point is that all other distractions and temptations will be removed, and we will finally experience the freedom of just worshiping. And I thought, I have
this life.
I have an impoverished view of what it means to age. And certainly death is the final enemy to be defeated. No one is diminishing that point at all. But death is not an enemy that we deny. We need to know there's something to be gained by rightly reckoning the days we have. And you know how, like, there are all of these like little snippets out there on the internet about, like, you never know when the last time is that you fill in the blank. And they're very poignant. I think they're very poignant. But I've thought, you never know when the last day of your giving care to others ends, and then you become the recipient of care. And for many of us, it'll be a gradual trade-off. But not knowing how long I have to be the one who serves means I really want to maximize those days. I want to number those days rightly, as insofar as it's possible. And I think about, He ordained for us good works that we were to do. Well, I'm going to do them. I'm going to do them. And I don't think the good works were making sure that, my hooded eyelids. We were laughing earlier about how one of the ways we knew we were older is when my eyeliner started to live in two places instead of one. Yes, you have good space.
Good
She was
eyelid
told,
space.
Where we have
Yeah.
liquids.
Yeah. But I want to think, gosh, if I only have so many days of being the one who gives the care, I want to make sure I've done my bit. So to
Well,
speak.
and that's when you look at 1 Corinthians 15, when it's talking about the resurrection, and it really happened. Paul's
It really
emphasizing, and then he ends with, therefore,
Yes. This was in our sermon yesterday at church.
be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the
good
work
works.
of the Lord. So it's not, therefore, hold on to everything here. And it's like, no, you've got an eternity.
Yeah.
It's really coming.
It's really
so
coming.
you can live freely. Like, we can chase the better things because all the other things will come.
They will. They will. Well, I have absolutely loved this entire episode, because even though we are the older women, I'm still looking to see what the next, if the Lord leaves me for several more decades, how to continue in this entire process. And so, Jen, we like to end with a question of some kind. And so I thought this one, I want to ask you, especially in light of this conversation, what would you say, since you think you're 24 inside? What would you say to your 24-year-old self that would help you become the woman that you are today?
Well, so my stepmom said this to me years ago, and I thought it was such an interesting observation, such an important thing to focus on. She was referencing, like, her own aging mom and her dad at the time, and she said, we become more so. And it's both an encouragement and a warning, right? Because especially, like, when you're in your 20s, you're developing some self-awareness of where your sharp edges are, that are being worn off. You're making mistakes and you're learning and all those things. And really, anytime we choose holiness over self-absorption or whatever the self fill in the blank is, we are becoming more so in the image of Christ. But the point is that you will calcify,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, as you age. You
Truly.
will. That is a lot of what aging is, you know, we call it becoming set in your ways. And the question is, in what ways will we become set? And when my grandmother, my stepmom's mother, when she was 91 and had just passed away, we were actually gathering all the quilts that she had made us. All the grandkids and kids brought the quilts and laid them on her casket and on the backs of the pews and everything. And so it was a very tender moment. And my stepmother got choked up, and she said, I just think the world of her. I just wish I could be more like her. And I thought, what would it be like to live to 91 and have your own child say that about you? And so, you know, Nanny was someone who became more so. So, I think that's what I want to think about.
Yeah. I love that I get to grow older with you all. I hope that I get to keep growing older with you
achieve
all.
full hag status
I know,
together.
Right?
Yes.
Right? We'll have our own little old woman's home.
The rest home
But
together.
exactly. I mean, that would be
remember, we were going to be a burden to our kids, but we'll still get together.
Let's
Yeah,
we'll
still
our
get
kids together. But find your people that you want to grow old with, and help each other do it in a way that sets your sights on something more. So hope you have enjoyed this episode of The Deep Dish. If you have, please share it with others. Comment. We would love to hear what you're thinking about in the entire aging process. And we hope you join us next time.